as well as several ministers. I see Minister Barbara Creasy as well coming through there. And of course, we are anticipating the arrival of the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, to be at any moment now. Of course, just minutes away from the budget speech, and the presiding officers, I'm sure, will have prepared themselves in terms of how they oversee the process if there is any disturbances. And of course, we haven't seen much of disturbances here in the House, except for one occasion where the minister was implicated in a dropped case of a sexual harassment. But today, I'm not sure whether that will still be on the minds of the EFF, but we'll see whether how the strategy is for today. For more analysis, we'll cross back to Nombu.
Thanks very much. Well, we're here in Cape Town, of course, just 10 minutes away from that scheduled delivery of the budget speech by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. And I'm joined right now by Mialani Holeni. He's the Group Chief Advisor at Ndiso Consulting Group. Thank you so much, Mialani, for joining us. So, as someone who's playing in the private sector space, of course, there's been a lot of conversation about the need for South Africa to have growth, economic growth, which we've really struggled to attain. And there's a lot of talk about public-private partnerships. What's your view on this, and is it easily attainable?
Well, I think this is the trick that government, if anything today, they must be able to be clear policy-wise with regards to inviting the private sector. So the private sector sits with over R1 trillion in terms of deposits as well as reserves that they are sitting with. But because of policy uncertainty, they are not able to invest wisely that money into the economy. So the government is having to play rob Peter to pay Paul and so on and so forth. But I think the other thing that government needs to stay away from is, of course, the social matters of our country are difficult. But you can't over-invest in terms of social side. You need to look at investing in the economic side to achieve that particular growth. And that is an avenue that you can allow the private sector to be able to pick projects that are key, that are strategic, that they can invest in, and they can see them through so that there can be growth. Because what we need in this case is either for government to minimize spending or to reduce spending, which has proved to be very difficult, or to collect more from a tax point of view. The more plausible side is to collect and build more of a revenue base that can enable the country to invest, even in the future.
So where should it collect taxes from in this current economic environment?
Well, this is a tough economic period, but we also see that, there could be proposals, for instance, around the wealth, tax that, may come through. There's not really much to go around because the government has already borrowed to the point where they are even funding OPEX, or at least salaries and grants and all of those different things. But I think, the windfall that had come from the mining sector is well drying up. So we need to look at, other sunset industries that government can be driving, which are more, at least can allow us to export. We've spoken a lot about localization, we've spoken a lot about beneficiation, and we've spoken a lot about industrialization. I think that is where government, from a tax collection point of view, they ought to be looking now at how do they get the manufacturing sector going, how do they get the localization. For instance, with the renewables, we are exporting a lot of the goods and the assets and the jobs that should be in the country, and instead buying from countries such as China and Germany and so on. We should instead be building a local renewables industry that can have people that will have got jobs. And of course, we're using our own minerals because we are currently mining from the pit and taking it to the port. That's something that we need to be dealing with from a collections point of view. But the efficiencies that SARS at least is showing, as well as going after the people who are wealthy.
Sorry, Mialani, let me just...
Expecting today a very tight rope. You mentioned that the Minister of Finance will be coming in. We'll look at the issues. I think today we'll have to do a lot of dancing because there's a lot of pleasing ahead of elections. There's a lot of appeasing in terms of balancing act. And I think, the budget, in our view, may end up, frustrating a lot of people because you won't have a clear direction with regards to where the budget is going. But the credibility of the budget, no doubt, because we know that, the fundamentals are there. But we would hope, as you were saying earlier, that, we don't start dipping into reserves to try and cover for the aspects that, cannot be covered in this case. Instead, finding more creative ways such as savings and redirecting funding from areas which funding has not been utilized for a long time. So it's a tight budget, and we're expecting that, it walks a tightrope, and hopefully it will be one of the better budgets that can start laying a foundation for growth in the future.
We do hope. Thank you very much. Ndate Mielani Holeni, thank you so much to him for speaking to us and giving us his thoughts on the upcoming budget. With that, I'm going to hand over to Bulelani Philip. Okay, so I'm going to continue. So we're just a few minutes away before Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana delivers that budget, eagerly anticipated budget 2024. There's so many things that he has to juggle. As Mielani was saying, he needs to do a lot of dancing. So he has to basically tell the nation where he's going to get that 15 billion rand extra from. He's likely to tell us about debt being higher going forward and our debt service costs rising. But the key thing, the elephant in the room really is economic growth. What needs to happen? What can he suggest that hasn't already been suggested for South Africa to get that injection of economic growth, for us to see the creation of jobs as a result of investment? We've heard from the Finance Minister about massive investment, over 900 billion rand over the medium term, but the evidence of that investment is still yet to have, to be born and to come through, and the creation of those jobs seen. We've just seen, of course, in the latest unemployment figure that unemployment continues to rise. The economy is just not growing at a sufficient rate. The estimation in the midterm budget was 0.8% for the 2023-2024 fiscal year. The anticipation actually is that that could be as low as 0.5%. And when that variable comes down, that of economic growth or GDP, it means that the other metrics like your debt to GDP ratio and your budget deficit are going to get worse, which is very negative. Of course, the ratings agencies, the markets will be looking at this, and if the budget does show that our fiscal metrics are worse, this will be rand negative. If we have a rand negative situation, this of course will be negative in terms of inflation, because we are an importing nation. We import a lot of fuel, and so we're going to be paying more in terms of prices, higher inflation. That interest rates for longer scenario may actually be more of a reality for us because of our idiosyncratic issues here in South Africa, while maybe other countries are boosting ahead. So we are here, and of course there's a lot of activity. The president has already gone in, more guests are going in, but I think once the president has come in, we can pretty much anticipate that things are going to get cracking. No doubt the finance minister and other key members of National Treasury have already settled in. All right, so we're going to hand over to my colleague, Bulelani Philip.
Crunch time, we're just short of a minute or two before the budget speech is delivered by the finance minister. And of course, the processes of Parliament is that a day after the budget speech has been delivered, the minister has a chance to actually brief the portfolio committees of finance of both houses, where he will be taking questions around some of the details of the budget speech. And of course, the three money bills that the finance minister will be presenting today will also have to go through the parliamentary processes before they end up in the two houses of Parliament for adoption and for implementation. So there's a process that must be followed before the budget is actually implemented by the two houses of Parliament. Of course, we do expect that the budget speech will get off at any time now, and a short while ago, the country's #1 citizen, President Cyril Ramaphosa, did enter the Cape Town City Hall. Of course, he is present to actually hear what the finance minister will be attaching as meat to the framework that he has given him 2 weeks ago during his State of the Nation address. Of course, SONA is followed by the budget speech in order for the president and the finance minister to give a clear plan of what the country intends to spend on in the coming year, and perhaps maybe give an indication of how government intends to intervene in some of the challenges that have been already identified by the political parties that are represented in the House. Of course, the main issue here is that the political parties are keen to hear how the minister will actually ensure that he invests in infrastructure that will lead to growth and job creation, as well as how he's going to tackle the issue of energy generation, and as well as in terms of how he's going to ensure that the rising unemployment rate is actually curbed and that it starts creating jobs, particularly for the youth. Of course, education, health is also issues that are up there, as well as issues of social development in terms of how government can actually continue to sustainably increase the issues of social grants. And of course, the one thing that the finance minister will also have to touch on is what is the future of the SRD grant, commonly known as the 350 grant for the unemployment. How long is it going to go for? We don't know. Perhaps maybe the minister can actually give an indication of how far government is able to fund that grant. The other issue that has been raised by labor and civil society is whether government should consider now in terms of implementing the basic income grant, which has been a call that has been coming for years, and whether again government can be able to afford that, and at what element or stage, because there's some unions like COSATU are saying it must be in line with the poverty line of around 1,000 rand a month. So wait and see in anticipation in terms of how the finance minister will actually be able to fund those kind of gaps. And of course, the other issue that we do expect him to talk about is how a government intends to respond to the growing challenge of funding higher education, as well as in terms of how it wants to ensure that the inefficiencies that are within the National Student Financial Aid Scheme are actually kept. The other thing is that he must also be giving a report back in terms of how government is coming or taking shape in terms of the structural reforms that are geared towards improving the operations of state-owned companies. You remember that these state-owned companies have actually been hard hit by the era of corruption in state capture, and now government has actually eyed that particular sector in terms of ensuring that it reduces corruption, it recovers monies that were stolen from this also is, so that that money can be used for basic services like funding education, schools and policing. Crime again is another top issue, given that the challenges that we have in crime would need more resourcing, and how is the minister going to resource not only the police but also some of the adjacent agencies like the National Prosecuting Authority, the Office of the Public Protector, the Hawks and the like, so that the coordinated approach that government is trying to ensure in dealing with crime and corruption is actually well funded and oiled. So these are some of the issues that the finance minister is expected to touch on. Whether he's going to appease or not, we'll wait to see. We now go to the finance minister.
Sharp. Nice, man. Okay, take a break from it.
There will now be an opportunity for silent prayer or meditation. Please be seated. Order. Order. Honorable members, take your seats, please. Before we proceed with today's business, I wish to announce that the vacancies which occurred in the National Assembly due to the passing of Ms. Alice Hlebani Mthembu and Ms. Violet Siwela have been filled by the nomination of Mr. Kulani Elphias Richard Hadebe and Ms. Nuran Muller, respectively. The members have been made and subscribed the oath in the Speaker's office. I welcome you, honorable members, to this National Assembly. Honorable members, the Secretary will now read the first order to third orders together.
Orders of the day, bill, and the tabling of the Division of Revenue Bill. The second order, introduction, second adjustment appropriation, 2023-2024 financial year bill. The third order of the day, introduction, gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve account.
The Honorable, the Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngagula, His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa, His Excellency Deputy President Paul Mashatile, Cabinet colleagues, members of the Executive Committee for Finance, honorable members, the Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, fellow South Africans. Madam Speaker, according to two prominent economists, Alberto Alsenia and Danny Rodrigues, they had this observation to say, and I quote, "A crude distinction between economics and politics would be that economics is concerned with expanding the pie, while politics is about distributing it." The point, Madam Speaker, is that the size and quality of the national pie is what informs and ultimately determines the realization of the political imperative of redistribution. Our mission over the past 30 years has been to restore both social and economic justice for our nation, and to decisively address the inequality that was the hallmark of the system of discrimination and dispossession. The budgets we have tabled since 1994 have been about securing the goal of growing the economy so that we can do more to address the inequalities and deprivation that still scar our society and undermine the promise of democracy. So it is with a great sense of privilege and purpose that I stand before you to present the last budget of the 6th Democratic Administration. Siyabuya. Madam Speaker, I therefore table the following documents before this House. The 24 Division of Revenue Bill, the 2024 Appropriation Bill, the estimates of national expenditure, the 2024 Budget Review, the 2024 Fiscal Framework, the second Adjustment Appropriation Bill, the budget speech, the Gold and Foreign Exchange Contingency Reserve Account Deferral Amendment Bill. Allow me to begin, Madam Speaker, with the global outlook. Global growth is forecast to increase from 3.1% this year to 3.2% in 2025. The moderate improvement is due to growth in the United States and several large economies. There are downside risks from potential spikes in the global oil price if the conflict in the Middle East escalates, and if growth falters in China, the country's largest trading partner. Despite improved global outlook for 2024, South Africa's near-term growth remains hamstrung by lower commodity prices and structural constraints. We estimate real GDP growth of 0.6% in 2023. This is down from 0.8% growth estimated during the medium-term budget policy statement. The revision is due to weaker than expected outcomes in the third quarter of 2023, particularly in household consumption and fixed investment. Between 2024 and 2026, growth is projected to average 1.1%. The growth outlook is supported by the expected easing of power cuts as new energy projects begin production and as lower inflation supports household consumption and credit extension. But there are also risks to the domestic outlook. These include persistent constraints in electricity supply, freight rail and ports, and higher sovereign credit risks. Our challenge, honourable members, is that the size of the pie is not growing fast enough to meet our developmental needs. As such, our fiscal strategy to support economic growth reduce risks to the economy while ensuring fiscal sustainability. Compared to a year ago, the budget deficit for 2023-24 is estimated to worsen from 4% to 4.9% of GDP. The higher budget deficit means that debt service costs in 2023-24 have been revised higher by 15.7 billion to 356 billion. Debt service costs will absorb more than 20% of revenue. To put this into perspective, spending on debt service costs is greater than the respective budgets of social protection, health, or peace and security. For this reason, honourable members, we are strengthening our strategy and sticking to our fiscal goals. A net reduction of 80.6 billion in non-interest expenditure is being implemented over the medium term. At the same time, revenue has been revised up by 45.6 billion over the medium term relative to the medium-term budget policy statement. And we have taken the decision to introduce a reform of the Gold and Foreign Exchange Contingency Reserve Account, also known as GFECRA. Taken together, even with the spending increases I will announce later, the national government gross borrowing requirement will decline from 457.7 billion in 2024 to 428.5 billion in 26-27. The deficit will begin to improve from 24-24 to an estimated 4.5% of GDP, reaching 3.3% by 26-27. Debt will now peak at 75.3% of GDP in 25-26. All of this puts us in a position to continue to protect core services. It allows 60% of non-interest spending to be directed to the social wage. It allows us to preserve capital spending. Compared to the medium-term budget policy statement, we are adding 57.6 billion to pay for the salaries of teachers, nurses, doctors, among many other critical services. Madam Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, in this budget, we're announcing a reform of the GIFEGRA. GIFEGRA is an account held at the Reserve Bank that captures gains and losses on the country's foreign currency reserve transactions. Simply put, if the rand strengthens against the US dollar and other reserve currencies, the account balance declines, and vice versa. The account balance has grown to over 500 billion over the years because the rand has depreciated over time. A new settlement arrangement is being introduced that will reduce government borrowing and improve the Reserve Bank's equity position. Ultimately, we are bringing South Africa closer to our peers and ensuring alignment to international best practices. We will draw down 150 billion rand of the GIFEGRA balance once we've ensured that the sufficient buffers are available to absorb exchange rate swings and the solvency of the Reserve Bank is not compromised. We have embarked on a broad structural reform agenda that aims to address the challenges that held back our growth. This agenda included areas like electricity, logistics, water, telecommunication, and visa reforms. The budget review details the good progress that has been made in these areas over the past few years, but obstacles remain. And let me focus on the two largest of these. Load shedding is a problem that confronts all South Africans. It disrupts production, operations, livelihoods. Reforming the sector will result in long-term energy security. We took the necessary decision in the past 5 years, and these are beginning to are bearing fruit. To promote further investment in renewables, this budget proposes an increase in the limit for renewable energy projects that can qualify for carbon offset regime from 50 megawatts to 30 megawatts. Eskom continues to be a key role player in the electricity sector, and the debt relief plan allows the entity to focus on its core business. We will release the report on the independent review of Eskom's coal-fired power stations in the coming week. The review was done to inform part of the conditions attached to the debt relief plan. The recommendations will fit into Eskom's corporate plans to bolster accountability and oversight. It is true the combination of private investment in new energy projects, rooftop solar installations, and improvements in Eskom generation fleet that load shedding will reduce, and reliability and security of supply improve. In addition, to support these efforts, we're introducing a new 2 billion conditional grant over the medium term to fund the rollout of smart prepaid meters. This will begin with the municipalities that have been approved for debt relief. To address South Africa's increasingly unreliable logistics system, Cabinet approved the Freight Logistic Roadmap in December 2023. The roadmap outlines immediate steps needed to improve port equipment, locomotive availability, and network security. It also sets out a clear path for enhancing efficiencies, facilitating the introduction of competition, and leveraging financial and technical support of the private sector. In this regard, third-party access to the freight rail network will be introduced by May 2024. In ports, private partner has been secured to upgrade Pier 2 of the Durban Container Terminal. This should increase private investment in equipment, enhance technological capability, and improve operational efficiencies. Government has provided Transnet with a 47 billion guarantee facility to support the entity's recovery plan and meet its immediate debt obligation. Like Eskom, the guarantees come with conditions. These conditions require Transnet to focus on its core activities and for the entity to introduce private sector partnerships. This will improve Transnet sustainability and support the implementation of the roadmap. Madam Speaker, I'm proud to announce that as part of this budget, we're introducing fundamental and far-reaching reforms to infrastructure financing and delivery. The reforms are to optimize the infrastructure value chain to be effective and efficient. In this way, we will strengthen the public investment management and the associated value chain. We will also attract private sector participation. In this regard, we gazetted amendments to the PPP regulatory framework on for public comments early this week, Minister Kubai. These amendments seek to reduce procedural complexity in undertaking PPPs, creating capacity to support and manage PPPs, formulate clear rules for managing unsolicited bids, and strengthen the governance of fiscal risk. We are reviewing institutional arrangements and governance for catalytic infrastructure. The intention is to create clearer mechanisms for accountability, cooperation, and coordination. We're also consolidating similar functions to reduce duplication and inefficiencies. The intention is to fast-track delivery, particularly of blended finance arrangements. We are introducing several financing instruments, such as infrastructure bonds and concessional loans. As part of this, a flow-through tax vehicle for specific infrastructure projects similar to trust and other investment vehicles is being considered. A new funding window for proposal under the new dispensation of financing instruments will be open to the public institution shortly. What does that mean? Those who know BFI, it's a new window of BFI. Through these reforms, greater efficiency gains and infrastructure delivery will be fast-tracked. This will benefit network sectors, social infrastructure, PPPs, and blended finance projects. Madam Speaker, the National Treasury plays a crucial role in mobilizing resources, designing incentives, and influencing policy to mainstream climate change. As climate-related disasters intensify and multi-layer risk-based approach is being developed to manage the associated fiscal risk. This considers various funding instruments from grants to contingency funds, including climate change response fund, depending on the incidence and intensity of the disaster event. The National Treasury is reviewing disaster response grants to improve efficiency and create incentives for disaster planning, preparedness, and risk reduction. It is also developing a climate budget tracking framework to influence policy, planning, and budget decisions by tracking climate-related expenditure in public budgets. The support of concessional funding providers such as multilateral development banks is going a long way to support our climate adaptation, mitigation, and energy transition, and sustainability initiatives. Crowding in the private sector is necessary to manage the climate disaster funds. The government has raised $3.3 billion so far from multilateral development banks and international finance institutions to support climate change, energy, and just transition objectives. We are actively participating in climate negotiations, aligning with government advocacy for reforming multilateral finance institutions. We are also working with the 8 municipalities to adapt and mitigate the effects of climate weather-related events by providing technical assistance for climate-responsive capital projects. The electric vehicle white paper outlines our strategy to transition towards a broader energy vehicle production and consumption in South Africa. Starting with electric vehicles, it aims to transition the automotive industry from primarily producing internal combustion engine vehicles to a dual platform that includes electric vehicles by 2035. To encourage the production of electric vehicles in South Africa, government will introduce an investment allowance for new investment beginning from the 1st of March 2026. This will allow producers to claim 150% of qualifying investment spending on electric and hydrogen-powered vehicles in the first year. The incentive will be implemented in addition to the existing support under the Automotive Production Development Program. Government has also reprioritized 964 million over the medium term to support transition to electric vehicles. Honourable members, the Public Procurement Bill was expeditiously passed by the National Assembly. The amended bill has now been referred to the National Council of Provinces for concurrence. National Treasury is supporting provincial legislators as they process the bill and conduct nationwide public hearings. The bill provides for transformation measures that through set aside, pre-qualification, advancement of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination, these measures will be applicable to specified categories of persons, including small enterprise owned by black people, black women, black youth, black people with disabilities, and enterprises with particular geographic area, including enforcement of transformation through the BBBE level status. The bill also makes provision for local industrialization through designation and measures for sustainable development, labor absorption, and enterprise development, among others. We're well aware that currently procurement processes often fall short of delivering the cost-effective solution to government's needs. Too often, there's a substantial disparity between the prices government is being charged and the prevailing market price. For instance, I'm told the government buys ICT hardware such as laptops, uninterrupted power supply devices, monitors, and toners at between 1.5 and 1.2 or 2 times more than market price. Given that government buys in large quantities, we should in fact be paying less and leveraging our buying power to get more value for our money. Obtaining value for money as a principle of efficiency, transparency, and competition remain paramount. And we want to assure South Africans that these principles are not incompatible with transformation. Honourable members, the weak performance of our economy has resulted in sharp deterioration in tax revenue collection for 23-24. Yaqala indaba nizakule ndawo enzima ye-tax. At 1.73 trillion, tax revenue for 23-24 is 56.1 billion lower than estimated in the 2023 budget. The shortfall is largely due to the decline in corporate profits and revenue for taxes on mining. Over the medium term, revenue projections are 45.6 billion higher than the 2023 medium-term budget policy estimates, which increased personal income tax and additional medium-term revenue proposals. This budget contains tax measures that will raise 15 billion in 2024-25 to alleviate immediate fiscal pressures and support faster debt stabilization. Revenue is mostly raised through personal income tax, but not adjusting tax brackets, rebates, and medical tax credits for inflation. For alcohol products, excise duties above inflation increases of between 6.7 and 7.27% for 24-25 are proposed. This means a can of beer increases by 14 cents. A can of cider and alcohol fruit beverage goes by 14 cents. A bottle of wine costs an extra 28 cents. Mthembu safe. A bottle of fortified wine will cost an extra 47 cents. A bottle of sparkling wine will cost an extra 89 cents. a bottle of spirits, including whiskey, bafowethu, gin and vodka increases by 5.53, R5.53. Salimala mato. We're also proposing to no sbeto BE up whiskey we're also proposing increasing increased tobacco exercise duty by 4.7% for cigarettes and cigarettes tobacco, and by 82% for pipe tobacco. This translates into R9.51 increase for cigars. Yabona ke chubana nalimala. 97 cents increase to a pack of cigarette, and an extra 57 cents for a pipe of tobacco. Hamkhelo Mkhane from Soweto, one of the over 2,700 South Africans who sent budget tips to the minister, has a suggestion I would like to share. Kamo says, I quote, I would suggest an introduction of a tax payment for Hubbly Bubbly as a cigarette and other alternatives. The country has seen an increase in a number of youth smoking these products, and parents are not pleased with this at all. Close quote. I would like to say to Kamo, as a parent myself, I agree with you. I'm certain the Minister of Health also agrees. You'll be happy to hear that we are tabling an increase of the excise duty on electronic nicotine and non-nicotine delivery systems known as vapes to R3.04 per milliliter. On environmental taxes, the carbon tax increased from 159 to 190 Rand per ton of carbon dioxide equivalent from the 1st of January 2024. The carbon fuel levy will increase, not the fuel levy, the carbon fuel levy will increase to 11 cents per liter of petrol and 14 cents per liter for diesel, effective from the 3rd of April. A discussion paper outlining proposal for the second phase of the carbon tax will be published for public comment later in the year. Madam Speaker, we are mindful of the already high cost of living, the impact fuel prices have on the food and transport costs. In this regard, we are proposing no increases to the general fuel levy for 24-25. This will result in a tax release of around 4 billion. This is money back in the pockets of consumers. Madam Speaker, progress has been made on the two-pot retirement system since I last addressed you during the medium-term budget policy system. Contribution to retirement funds will be split, with 1/3 going into a savings component, 2/3 going into a retirement component. Now, ndifuna ukuzicacisa lento ke bantakwethu. Ndifuna ukucacisa lento. Abantu bandistopa bonke esitratweni bandibuza uba iphuma nini imali yethu. Nibaxelele ke ngomalungu eParliament xa nigoduka ukuba from i-1st kaSeptember bonke bazayifumana le mali. From i-1st kaSeptember la mali yepension iyafumaneka. Nam funeka bayeke undiphazamisa endleleni. Ndinomnye udadewethu pha oyitishala unozicela usafuna ngokuba ndiyazi noyazi uba imali yena azayifumana ndizayazelaphi ngoba kaloku uyayazi ngepension yakhe. So from the 1st of September 2015, we must commend on Honorable Maswanga. He has been vociferous in making sure that this bill passes. And we even fought on the timelines. It was difficult to persuade him because the industry was not ready. He wanted to be effective from the 1st of April, but the industry was not ready, but he allowed us to postpone it to the 1st of September. Thank you, Comrade Maswanga. So the two-pot system ensures that we strike a balance between preserving contributions to safeguard a better retirement for members while addressing the plight of the people to access some of their retirement funds to help ease their financial burden in times of distress. Over the next few years, we're also implementing a global minimum corporate tax to limit the negative effects of tax competition. Multinational corporations with an annual revenue exceeding 750 million euros will be subject to an effective tax rate of at least 15%, regardless of where their profits are generated. This is a global tax. That's why even the benchmark is euros. It's an agreement in the OECD. So we're beginning to implement that. So irrespective of where your profits are generated, the proposed reform is expected to yield an additional 8 billion in corporate tax revenue in 26-27. I encourage interested parties to provide comments on the draft global minimum tax bill published today. Our long-term tax policy strategies remain focused on broadening the tax base while improving tax compliance and administrative efficiency. Visible progress has been made in rebuilding and modernizing SARS. The tax authority has expanded the tax register, improved debt collections, and reduced fraudulent refunds and trade valuation. This has led to improvements in revenue collection. To address the higher levels of illicit tobacco, SARS is deploying CCTV and related technologies at licensed tobacco manufacturers. Investigations and prosecutions have resulted in 10 billion in additional assessment, of which over 4 billion has been collected from the key players in the illicit gold and tobacco industry. These and other efforts have assisted with the improvement in revenue. Our bigger challenge, as I've stated earlier, is that our pie is not growing fast enough, and this limits our ability to generate sufficient revenues to distribute among our priority areas. Madam Speaker, at the time of the 2023 medium-term budget policy statement, when revenue collection had performed much worse than anticipated, departments had to reprioritize spending and absorb the wage increases within their baseline. These measures were taken to protect our fiscal integrity. Equally, critical programs had to be protected. This is a practical expression of fiscal consolidation that supports delivery of core services and the social wage. Since then, we have been able to reverse some more of the fiscal consolidation announced at the time of the medium-term budget policy statement. In this budget, I'm able to announce that the education sector is allocated an additional 25.7 billion for the carry-through cost of the wage increase over the medium term. At the same time, we're able to protect the budget of critical programs such as school nutrition programs, the program that provides food to pupils in almost 20,000 schools. The Early Childhood Development Grant is allocated a 1.6 billion, raising to 2 billion over the medium term. Health is allocated a total of 854 billion over the medium term. These allocations include 11.6 billion to address the 2023 wage agreement, 27 billion for infrastructure, 1.4 billion for the NHI grant over the same period. The allocation for the NHI is a demonstration of the government's commitment to this policy. There remain a range of system strengthening activities that are key enablers of an improved public healthcare system that must be undertaken. Such activities include building a national health information system and digital patients' records, upgrading health facilities and improving the quality of care to ensure that they meet the minimum criteria to be certified as accredited for contracting under NHI. Strengthening facilities and district management in preparation for contracting. Granting semi-autonomous status for central and potential other hospitals, and developing reference prices and provider payment methods for hospitals. Many of these activities are already underway, but require further development before the NHI can be rolled out at scale. Madam Speaker, there's also been significant progress in improving access to public transport services for low-income commuters. The Rail Recovery Program of the Passenger Rail Agents of South Africa is continuing with 27 corridors reopened by December 2023. This will increase the number of passengers on Metro Rail from 15.6 million in 2022-23 to an estimated 48.6 million by 26-27. To ensure the effective discharge of office duties during elections and its other responsibility beyond the polls, the Independent Electoral Commission is allocated 2.3 billion. The police and the defense purely for the elections. The police and the defense purely for the elections are allocated an additional 350 million to support the elections. A further 200 million will be allocated for political party funding as political parties prepare for the general elections. Government also supports resettled farmers through land redistribution and tenure reform programs, which have been allocated 6 billion over the medium term. To keep pace with inflation and increase access, permanent social grants are increased. Let me just pause and say, walking stick. Uthe wena kakuhlukane nosinyusela nge-20 rand. So I want to assure Lagogo ukuthi mna degenerous anzomnyusela nge-20 rand. We are giving them an increase of 100 rand to the old age grant. Water veteran, disability care and grants. This will be split in 90 rand effective from April and 10 effective from October. 50 rand increase for the foster care and 20 rand increase to the child support grant.
Order.
We are sensitive to the increase in the cost of living for nearly 19 million South Africans who are really rely on these grants to make ends meet. In this regard, we have done as much as the fiscal envelope allows. Work is currently underway to improve the COVID-19 social relief of distress grant. By April the 1st, like all other grants, these grants are starting on the 1st of April. As the President has said, that is going to be improved. Work is being done. The Minister of Social Development is publishing regulations. When we finally gazette those regulations, the new grant and the figure will be published together with those regulations. These improvements will be within the fiscal framework. For the extension of the grant beyond 2025, we have made the point that it may have to find some revenue source for it. PAC. We have also made provision for key initiatives aimed at job creation. 61.4 billion is allocated for employment program over medium term. 7.4 billion has been identified for the Presidential Employment Initiative. Government is also prioritizing fighting crime and corruption with a focus on enhancing law enforcement agency. Mamela, I was in that going on. If facts is on the table, we're doing the work. We're doing the work. Asingcono siyadeliver. A total of 765 billion rand is allocated to peace and security cluster. In the coming financial year, 10,000 new police recruits will be trained. And as part of the country's responsibility to promote regional peace and stability, this budget will also allocate funding for the deployment of soldiers in Mozambique and DRC. Work on costing and identifying these needs for these critical missions will continue throughout the year, and funding will be allocated as such. 628 million has been allocated to the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development for the implementation of FATF and State Capture Commission recommendations, bringing the total funding to these efforts to 2.3 billion. Government is using 2.9 billion from the Criminal Asset Recovery Account to combat illegal mining and other priority crimes, with a 60% allocated, in fact 1.7 billion allocated for the deployment of the police, including vehicle procurement. This budget is also prioritizing infrastructure provision. Government plans to invest more than 943 billion rand in public infrastructure. Spending will support refurbishment and maintenance of existing assets and the building of new infrastructure. Madam Speaker, 2.8 trillion, or put it differently, 5.1% of total non-interest expenditure is allocated to provinces and municipalities over the next 3 years. 531.7 billion is allocated to local government and 2.2 trillion for provinces. An additional 105 billion rand is allocated to provinces for the next 3 years to cover the cost of implementing the 2023 Public Service Wage Agreement, mainly in education and health sector. Provision of these additional funds will cushion the wage bill pressure faced by these critical personnel-intensive departments, while freeing up resources for capital investment and goods and services. Moreover, reductions that were previously made on some of the grants have been reversed. Restoring baseline of these grants will help maintain important service for the most vulnerable and provide for critical capital investment. However, to ensure public finances remain sustainable, the reductions are maintained to several other grants baseline, although many continue to grow over the next 3 years despite the reductions. Regarding municipalities, an additional 1.4 billion is provided for municipal disaster recovery grant to fund the repair and reconstruction of infrastructure damage by the tragic floods of 2023. Madam Speaker, municipalities are the coalface of service delivery. Sadly, an unacceptable number of them are experiencing weaknesses in governance, financial management, and service delivery. To address these challenges and to transform municipalities into engines of growth, we have adopted a multi-pronged approach. It focuses on tightening budget processes, ramping up oversight, increasing the skills and capacity of municipal employees, and driving investment in maintaining and building infrastructure. Madam Speaker, this year the country hosts the annual meetings of the new development bank, which will happen for the second time since formation of the BRICS Bank. In 2025, South Africa takes on the presidency of the G20, following that of Brazil and India. Before that, South Africa's G20 president is an opportunity for us to advance the most pressing economic and developmental and financial issues that face poor and developing countries. As President Ramaphosa rightly stated in his State of the Nation address, our goal is to place Africa's development at the top of the agenda when we host the G20 in 25. We are working on the necessary allocations and identification of funds to make sure that the various events are a success. As we have shown recently, South Africa remains an important regional and international leader. Through participation and advocacy on platforms such as G20, we can push for substantive reform of multinational institutions like the World Bank and IMF, so that developing countries participate more equally in the decision-making process and global governance. Moral courage and know-how are not in short supply in our country. We should harness these gifts not only to better ourselves and our economy, but for the benefit of the entire continent. Madam Speaker, we've come a long way in the last 30 years. 30 years ahead of us, and whatever the challenges and opportunities they bring are something we should look forward to. Given our difficult past and some of the inevitable challenges we have faced as a young democracy trying to find its place in a world marked by a number of new and overlapping crises, it would be easy to indulge in extremes, either of blind optimism or crippling pessimism. We should resist both these extremes. Rather, we should heed the words of our first democratic President Nelson Mandela, who more than saw the pursuit of socio-economic justice and shared prosperity as a journey rather than a destination. Allow me to repeat what the President said in his closing remarks. I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I've made missteps along the way, but I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, the only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I've taken a moment to rest and to steal a view of the glorious vista that surrounds me. To look back to the distance I have come, but I can only rest for a moment, for with freedom come responsibility. I dare not linger, for my long walk is not ended. In the London. Madam Speaker, as I conclude, I want to remind South Africans that the message today should take away from this budget. Government is making the most out of its way with limited resources. We continue to support economic growth, reduce growth of government debt and the cost of debt, allocate more funds for core services, and provide the social wage. I'm grateful to the President and Deputy President for their continued support and leadership. Thank you to the Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. Masondo, and the excellent National Treasury team led by Director General Dr. Duncan Peterson, the majority of whom, Mr. President, are Tinsalos. Thank you to the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services and the Governor of the South African Revenue Bank. Thank you to my colleagues, the ministers in the committee of the Mincom Board and in the Budget Council, who shared the heavy load of the tough decision that meant to sustain the public finances. To Parliamentary Command, my chairperson, Honorable Maswangani, Honorable Telezi, of course, and to my wife and family, your love, support, and forbearance are daily inspiration. Lastly, thank you to you, each and every one of South Africans, and those who have been sending messages encouraging.
The Minister of Finance. Order. The papers tabled by the Minister will be referred to the relevant committees. Honorable members, I will now suspend proceedings until 20 past.
Right, so those are live visuals coming through from the Cape Town City Hall. Of course, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana presenting his budget. going to inspire ratings agencies, given what they were looking out for? But ultimately also, how is this going to affect consumers at large? We're getting reactions. Bulelani Phillips is standing by just outside, and he's ready to give us his reactions on his end. It's over to you, Bulelani.
Yeah, well, a warm welcome back again here outside the Cape Town City Hall. Now that the budget speech is all said and done, we look forward to see how the political parties react. And first up, joining me is Dr. Dion George, the spokesperson on finance. Dr. George, coming to this speech, you were not so hopeful that he will strike the right chords. But does this budget take us to the promised new dawn?
It certainly doesn't do that. It's definitely the ANC's bailout budget. As expected, the minister is now going to raid the Reserve Bank's contingency reserve that is required for risk, to manage risk. Is going to raid that to cover some of government's debt, but it's not going to be enough. Government's already paying 1 billion rand per day in interest on its debt. So taking this 150 billion from the contingency reserve, at least that, there's going to be more. We can see it's the start of a complete raid. That's not going to make any difference whatsoever to the lives of South Africans battling the cost of living crisis. He did absolutely nothing for them. The SRD grant is extended for 1 year, but what about after that? The DA proposed evolving it into a job seekers grant. Also, the increase in the child grant it's hopelessly too little. So nothing happened here. Yes, taxes did not increase directly, but they did stealthily, because what happens was, by not adjusting the tax brackets for inflation, every South African is actually going to be paying more tax because their salaries are going up according to inflation. So there is, in fact, a price that South Africans are paying. Also, what the minister could have done is he could have reduced the tax on fuel, for example. He could have cut the zero VAT rated basket of food. He could have done that very easily, but chose not to. And as I said this morning, the minister would have to choose whether he's going to carry on spending unsustainably on, for example, the bloated public sector wage bill and taking the debt off from Eskom and now also from Transnet, or he can focus on the needs of the people, because there wasn't any in between. And he did a dismal job today. He really did not deliver as he should have delivered to the most vulnerable South Africans battling a cost of living crisis, with 5 million children in our country that are starving today, according to the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund.
Talking about debt, do you think he's done enough to actually rein in the debt as you would have liked?
Well, what he's done is it appears to be taking at least 150 billion from the contingency reserve, which we don't think is a good idea, throwing it into a hole that is actually not going to get plugged. That's the key thing, because the spending is the problem. And of course growth. So we've got two problems. We've got a growth problem and a spending problem. Now growth is projected downwards to 0.6%, which means that our economies actually get smaller, which means that there would be fewer people in jobs and then therefore less revenue. So that deficit is going to get wider. So by just throwing in this amount of money that will just disappear into this hole, nothing's going to happen. What we needed was a structural change, and that was the structural change on the big ticket items. Get the private sector involved in the state-owned enterprises. He said so, but there's no action on it. Also, cut back the public sector wage bill, because that gives enough room then for service delivery. Also, what happened is that he's basically rescinded the cuts that he had put into place because of the public sector wage bill. He's reversed that because he wants to actually feed that, unfortunately, and that is not going to work. But what he should have done is he should have focused on hard-working, battling South African households, the cost of living crisis. He never mentioned it once. He just simply doesn't care.
All right, Dr. Dion George, the spokesperson on finance of the DA, I'm going to ask you to just move out of picture, and I bring in now Steve Swarte from the ACDP. Does Dinswalo live a better life after this budget?
Definitely not. And what we are seeing now, as we were concerned, we are seeing government debt levels increase. We're seeing the budget deficit increase. And now not only that, having run down Transnet and having run down Eskom and causing logistics crisis and causing a power crisis, which has impacted economic growth, we're now seeing a plundering of our reserve funds at the Reserve Bank. And that is a great concern. You remember earlier today, I said this is something we are concerned about. 150 billion rand from our reserve fund at the Reserve Bank. Now that is there to buffer us in case of capital outflows, and it's to protect the Reserve Bank. And now we are seeing the for the purposes of trying to balance the books. What happens next year when again we've got a problem? Is it again going to be accessed? Is it again going to be taken? So we are concerned about that aspect. I suppose one can look and say, yes, there wasn't a direct increase in the fuel price, there wasn't a direct increase in personal taxes, although bracket creep must come into it. But at the end of the day, I don't think he has addressed what is critical, and that is economic growth stimulus, so that each person can get a job, can contribute, and we can grow the economy with infrastructure development. So we as the ACDP are disappointed. We think we could have done more. But at the end of the day, we have to attribute what he's saying today to economic policies over the last 30 years that have ended and landed us as a country in where we are today, at the situation that we, for the first time ever, have to almost plunder our reserves at the South African Reserve Bank. And that is something we're going to watch very carefully. What is that money going to be used for? Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. Steve Swart from the ACDP. I see off picture as well, voter vessels from the Freedom Front Plus. Your take on the minister's budget speech?
Well, I think we are in a deep, deep crisis, and his speech and the budget actually confirms that. You know, I think Steve now also mentioned the fact that 100 billion rand is taken from the foreign exchange and gold reserve fund. That is a government that's not planning for the future and for problems and crises that might be there in the future. But the fact of the matter is also that whilst he mentions infrastructure development, which is necessary to get the economy going, in the second adjustment appropriations bill for this current financial year that you also tabled here today, he takes away 70 million rand from the public infrastructure, and he gives it to the presidency. That means that is actually, and this government is not serious about infrastructure development, because whilst saying one thing and doing the other, it's actually ridiculous. And then we have a problem with regards to actually getting the economy going. Although he did not increase taxes, the problem is that because there's no tax bracket creeping, individuals will pay more tax, and that will be detrimental to the economy. Also, not increasing the medical aid tax credits will also be detrimental. People won't have money to spend in the economy. And the multinational taxation and the global tax, minimum tax that they are also introducing is not good for companies to create employment opportunities. So we are moving in the short term and not creating a situation where there's actual economic growth.
All right, thank you so much, voter vessels. I'm going to ask you to step out of picture and bringing in the UDM Chief Whip, Mr. Ngabayomzi Kwankwa. For the UDM, does this budget speech lead us to a better life for Dinswalo?
No, it doesn't. Actually, it depresses the whole nation. It pushes us further and further into the quagmire simply because of the ANC's long-standing mismanagement of the South African economy. In essence, intenzeka apha Bulelani sithengisa ihlangu, sithengisa iVascom, sithengisa izitya ze-country xa sithatha imali ku-Central Bank reserves in order for us to be able to feed the family because of that mismanagement. You are still doling out guarantees to Transnet, for example, for the 7 billion rands. You are still saying exactly the same things that they said when President Beki, for example, was still in charge. The only thing that they are trying to get right, they try to get right because it's an elections budget. They try to talk about increasing social grants. The first tranche will come now, the next one will be after election. So they are saying if you vote for us, we'll revow during October. The other issue, for an example, which is happening is that we are spending more and more money on debt service costs than any other time during democracy. You will consider one thing, that in about 2014, it's contained in their documents, our public debt was at 1.5 trillion rands. We are almost 6 trillion rands. And have you made a dent in the unemployment rate? Have you made a dent in the inequality rate, in the poverty rate? The answer is an emphatic no.
All right, thank you so much, Ngabayomzi Kwankwa, the UDM Chief Whip. I'm going to ask Ms. Veronica Mente, the national chairperson of the EFF. As the EFF, how have you received this budget speech by the finance minister?
As expected, we have had things that we knew that there is no capacity to deliver on them. To cut on NSFAS massively like that is an insult to young people of this country. To not have a plan on how we're going to grow the economy of this country, to not have a plan on how our municipalities are going to be enhanced and strengthened in terms of more budget. Less budget was given to municipalities that are at the cold face of service delivery on a daily basis. They must make sure we live in hygienic areas, our water is clean, our roads and potholes are dealt with. Their municipalities' budget is cut massively. And when you come to social spending, it's also under austerity measure. The only item that we see, which is the huge item, is the debt service. And we continue to be told, no, we will slow down on borrowing. We are not told that borrowing will stop.
Are we in dangerous territory in terms of the borrowings?
We are in the West. Our debt is costing 75% of our GDP. We are not a country that should be borrowing anything, because whatever we're making goes towards paying debt, and it's not going towards the well-being of the people. Therefore, our government has no capacity and has no business borrowing. We have to make sure that we use what we have to strengthen the issue of the economy and make sure we grow it by building the facilities that are going to work, like factories, that making sure that especially public works is taking care of all the facilities of the state, and we start outsourcing, because another item is on the issue of outsourcing, where it's costing a state more than it should be. If you capacitate the state, it means that your state will spend less, but if you outsource, you are going to spend more on a budget that you do not have.
All right, thank you so much, Veronica Mende, the national chairperson of the EFF. Inkosi Mzamo Buthelezi, the deputy president of IFP. I know you were not so hopeful coming to this budget, but did the minister strike the right chords for you?
I think the minister was very much engineering in his budget. He, besides the nice to hear what he said, but we are very much worried about the fact that he's stepping into the reserves, which is a clear admission that they failed to ignite our economy. We can't be excited about that. As much as he has allocated some increases in different departments, but the fact of the matter is all departments are underperforming. Some are even failing to spend the allocation. We have a deficit in collection, which is a serious problem, yet continues to actually spend, which is very much of a problem. I think he just wanted to put a budget that will actually please people outside there, knowing very well that all those things that he has committed to and he has announced won't actually work.
Thank you so much, Inkosi Mzamo Buthelezi, the deputy president of the IFP. Of course, a lot of food for thought from all the political parties that have just commented. For more reaction and analysis, I cross back to you, Nombu, on the other side.
The 2024 budget speech, bringing you all the government's plans for the economy and what they mean for you. How will government fiscal consolidation affect you and your money? Can the minister implement further spending reductions, or will he push for more efficiency across government? Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is under pressure to use his speech to calm investors. And with South Africans going to the polls this year, Godongwana must also restore trust in government's ability to deliver services to all South Africans. The SABC News will bring you live coverage of the budget on the 21st of February 2024. SABC News.
2024, but that of course would have already been something that they had put out there in the market, so that people would have been aware of that. They did indicate that because they're aware that consumers have been struggling with the high cost of living, they're not going to raise the general fuel levy. So that's good news, I guess. They say that's going to save taxpayers some 4 billion rand. But what was interesting is that, you know, there's been a lot of talk about how Transnet is such an important key player for the economy, and there have been calls by the private sector for the government to put some money in there, but there was no word on any additional funds going to Transnet in this fiscal year. We know that the government did give a guarantee of 47 billion rand, and that's really for Transnet to be able to deal with some of its outstanding debt and a couple of operation issues. Now, of course, we are going to continue in conversation with an economist, but before we do that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Tepa Mongwai, who has a politician with him. So they interrupted us because the thing is they want to
to the value up to 30,000 rand. You've been asking for it, you've got it.
Well, look, the wage negotiations are still taking place in the Public Service Bargaining Council, so that hasn't been incorporated yet. So that must still be determined. We want to give space for that. But we're quite pleased with the two-part pension reform. It's in Parliament. The National Assembly passed the initial bill yesterday, so we need to get the Parliament to conclude all the bills by April so the President can sign it. We're confident it will happen on the 1st of September, so there's been good progress in that regard. We really hope to see more support for workers and for the unemployed. So the SAD grant has been extended by another year, but it hasn't been adjusted for inflation since 2020. So it really is being eroded in terms of its value. The presidential employment program hasn't been increased. It's giving space for 400,000 young people, but we really hope, given the size of our unemployment, to have seen it increase much more substantially, especially given the President had made that commitment in the State of the Nation address.
But there are plans to invest in infrastructure. They are bringing in a lot of private sector to partner with government. There's a lot of innovation in terms of how government can tackle infrastructure. What's your take on that?
So the infrastructure programs are quite good. It's about 950 billion rand, half of it with SOEs, which is critical. I think the challenge here is to make sure that there's capacity to implement it, because we've seen many municipalities struggle to spend the money and return it to Treasury. So we really do hope to see an improvement in that regard. PRASA itself has been a culprit of getting money and then failing to spend it on infrastructure.
Thank you very much. That's Matthew Parks from COSATU. And of course, a lot of mixed reaction from this budget. And of course, the problems are not really, out of the picture. Currently, we still have high cost, we still have high expenditure, we still have high debt levels, and of course there is some reduction in terms of debt to GDP. Government is saying that it will now come down to 74% instead of the 77.7% that was initially projected in the medium-term budget policy statement. For more reaction, I'm now handing over to Bulelani, my colleagues.
Thank you so much, Tsepo, and we'll take more reaction now. Good Party Secretary General is Brett Heron. And for you as a Good Party, is this a good story told by the Finance Minister?
No, it's not a good story at all. I mean, the story starts off with the expression by the Finance Minister that we can expect 1.1% average growth over the next few years. And that underpins what we've been saying, and that is we have an economic growth crisis in South Africa. We needed to hear from the President an economic growth plan that was coherent. And from the Minister of Finance, we needed an economic growth plan that is coherent, because we need at least 5 to 6% annual growth if we're going to reduce unemployment meaningfully and lift people out of poverty. So this was not a budget that's going to address unemployment or poverty, and it was not a good news story.
Marginal increases in social grants, do they go far enough?
No, they do not go far enough. And if you're going to address poverty, we need to look at the social security system. The big disappointment, obviously, was the inability of the government to move beyond the extension of this 350 rand per month social relief of distress grant. That should have been converted into a basic income grant that at least meets the lower bound poverty line of about 1,000 rand per month. So tinkering with the social grant system, adding 20 rand here, 50 rand there, 100 rand spread over 2 payments to the old age pension is simply not good enough.
All right, thank you so much, Brett Heron, Secretary General of the Good Party. I see that the bells of Parliament are ringing for another important matter, but before that begins, ATM President is Vuyo Sungula. As the party, how did you receive this budget?
This budget is a missed opportunity in the sense that it did not attempt to stimulate the economy in terms of ensuring that the economy is production-driven, is manufacturing-driven. We've got a PIC that is managing over 2.6 trillion, but you find that majority of that 2.6 trillion goes towards companies that are listed on the JSE, and very few, a low amount goes towards the SMMEs. And again, that amount goes towards programs that are consumer-driven instead of programs that are towards manufacturing and production-driven. Because we're of the view as a party that in order to stimulate the economy, we need to be very, very vigorous in terms of the local production of goods and services. And the only way to do that, it is to fund programs that are towards opening factories. That is the only way in which we could stimulate the economy. The second one, there's a missed opportunity on the informal sector, because that sector has got over 500 billion that is circulating that sector per annum. and majority of that sector is in the hands of foreign nationals that are coming from other countries, making use of the infrastructure of public services, but they are contributing nothing in terms of taxes because they are not taxed. So there's a missed opportunity in terms of revenue collection, and that is the reason why the government keeps on wanting to borrow money instead of utilizing the economies that are there in the country for tax collection.
All right, thank you so much. Vuyo Zungula is the ATM president. For more analysis, we now cross to Nobu.
With Kim Silberman. She's from Matrix Asset Management. Thank you very much for speaking to us, Kim. So, of course, economists have been looking at this budget closely. You're one of them. You were in the lockup. Your overall impressions of this budget, was it progressive, given the fact that, of course, there were a lot of constraints for the minister?
Progressive in terms of the way that it deals with redistribution of wealth, perhaps. I mean, it increased spending by around 250 billion, and that was mainly on wages and other social grants and social spending. I think the problem there is we're not sure where Treasury is getting the money from. So it was really unspecified where that additional 250 billion is coming from, and that will determine how progressive it really is.
Of course, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana talked about this thing that we've all been hearing about recently, reliance on the golden foreign exchange contingency reserve account. They're going to be tapping onto that to the tune of 150 billion rand. Just break it down for the layperson at home. What does this mean exactly? Is this a good thing? Will help government? Do they have to pay that money back?
Okay, so maybe to put it in some context, they don't have to pay the money back, and basically it's free money. So they're not paying for that money at all. And we're not losing our foreign reserves either. So what the Reserve Bank is doing is they're taking the profits that we've made on holding our foreign reserves. So we've been holding $50 billion, and obviously with the depreciation of the rand, that's now worth a lot more. And that profit is allowed to be used by treasuries. This is not uncommon. So we're doing something that is done throughout the world. And what you can do is access that cash. But of course, if you access that cash as treasury, either you sell those reserves, which we don't want to do because we need reserves, or the SARB can actually just print money, which is what they're going to do. The risk that you run there is that money could be inflationary because essentially you're printing money. And the SARB has been in negotiations and talks with the IMF, etc., around how this can be non-inflationary. And I think that from what I can see, they do have a procedure and a facility, and it won't be an inflationary impact on South Africa. Now that money is, I think, it's wise to use it at a time when our debt service costs are rising at 17% year on year, and debt service costs are the biggest component of spending. I mean, we spend more on that than on health or community development or education. And so to be able to take that money, which essentially is at no cost, it reduces the cost of funding, and you can use it to pay down debt. So to reduce our debt stock and really put us on a better trajectory in terms of our interest payments, and that frees up cash to spend on other things. It
does sound a little bit like a quick fix, to be honest, because we see that the growth rate has actually been downwardly adjusted to 0.6% for this particular financial year, for the fiscal year 2023 to 2024, which ends at the end of March this year. But then as well, what's interesting is that the minister says that over the medium term, revenues are going to be 45 billion rand higher than expected. It's very confusing.
Well, I think you touched on that in terms of the bracket creep. So the money's coming from us, it's coming from taxpayers. And I mean, there were some other things that they made mention of, the two-pot system where you can access some of your retirement savings. So that also will be taxed. So they're going to access around, I think, 5 billion from the two-pot system. And then when you increase wages that you pay government workers, you also tax those government workers. So there's money as well in increasing those wages. So in that way, we're increasing revenue, but it is through taxes, it's not through growth.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yes.
Kim, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for speaking to us as always. Kim Silberman, she's an economist at Matrix Asset Managers. So we're going to hand over now to my colleague, Tsepo Mongwai.
Thank you very much, Nompu. And of course, government and National Treasury in particular has maintained that debt consolidation continues, but also indicated that in the budget review that they will continue to make sure that some of the budget cuts that were announced in the medium-term budget policy statement are reversed. So there is some revisions in terms of those cuts. For more on this, we're now joined by FEDUSA's Secretary General, Ritva Ajam. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your time. Do you think that as the workers, you have expressed unhappiness with some of the budget cuts? Is this budget speech addressing those concerns?
Well, good afternoon, first and foremostly, and let me add that this is the last budget of the sixth administration, so many of the rabbits will have to be pulled out of the hat today here. The only element that brings us a degree of comfort is only but two. Number one, that there has not been an increase in the general fuel levy, and this most certainly brings relief to millions of commuters and workers at the same time. And secondly, that the minister had heeded caution in terms of the additional allocations that had been brought forward to the budgets in terms of education, health, police in particular, and at the same time the allocation to the NHI. But we have to caution that we will be effective and stringent oversight mechanisms in terms of that implementation phase to make sure that the 10,000 additional police officers are being brought to the fore, to make sure that service delivery and the protection of our citizens are in place, especially now that we are seeing that the critical expenditure is in place. So it's to one extent assisting. On the other hand, there are some challenges that have been identified.
The inflation adjustment, or so-called bracket creep, was not announced, so it means that workers will not have that cushion against inflation. Your take on that?
Absolutely. We have uttered this before, that the minister should not treat this budget, this national budget, as a household budget. We are seeing the ravaging effects of inflation. When you get an increase, you in essence are seeing a demotion in terms of what you have as disposable income. When the electricity prices are skyrocketing, when the fuel prices are running away, and when food prices are simply not reined in, how then do we manage? So ultimately, that would have been one of the elements that we had hoped that the minister would effectively address. But unfortunately, with the lower income and the revenue that has been generated, we most certainly acknowledge that, but it must be an element that the minister has to address in future budgets.
Thank you very much. That's Ms. Ritva Ajam. He's the Secretary General of FEDUSA. I now hand over to my colleague, Bulelani Phillips.
Thank you so much, Tsepo. Of course, the opposition not impressed by the finance minister's budget speech. Let's take a look at what the ruling party says. Dr. Gwen Ramokgopa is the ANC's Treasurer General. Of course, you'd be happy as the ruling party because you would have given him counsel and guidance in terms of what he needs to put in his speech. But the question really that's being raised by the opposition is that money can be allocated, but does it go to the intended purpose?
Thank you very much, Bulelani, and greetings to viewers. Indeed, we are supportive of the minister's approach, very balanced, acknowledging that the economy is not yet fully recovered, and as he has said, he has put more money on the economic growth areas like rail, electricity and other infrastructure. He has also prioritized reducing government debt and servicing of the debt, and more importantly, the investment in the social security net, schooling, health, including NHI, the initial capital to get the NHI going, and as well as looking at other services like police services and all that. So it's really balanced and responsible.
One of the key issues really raised also in the State of the Nation address is the issue of fighting crime and corruption. Now, as the ANC TG, we're told that one of your donators or donors is a person who's a criminal accused, Edwin Sodi. Firstly, is he a donor to the ANC? And as the ANC, how do you deal with people who have got questionable business with government and who also are the donors of the party?
Bulelane, I make it very clear in the way I work that we've got three priorities. One, to improve the brand ANC. We acknowledge that there are people who did wrong things in the name of the ANC, but we are saying let the might of the law take its toll. Let them answer. They were not sent to do wrong things. Second issue is to also have a credible and effective leadership and impactful leadership. So we stick on those principles. Obviously, from my side, also to have a balanced, a healthy balance sheet, and we're also gunning for a clean audit. So we have our books open. We are also audited by the IEC and all that, and we are accountable. If people do wrong, let them face the might of the law, like many others are. Lastly and quickly, are you able to give us a sense of what is the ANC's election budget? I will not now disclose that, because we are, as we implement programs, we're also fundraising. Just this morning, I had an activation breakfast for our pledge program. Donations can be as little as 10 rands. So we are funding it from our own support base and our own membership. And with that commitment that is there, the positive spirit, we're looking forward to a resounding victory.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gwen Rabuchopa, the ANC Treasurer General. And for more reaction now, I cross back to my colleague, Tsepo.
Economy and what they mean for you. How will government fiscal consolidation affect you and your money? Can the minister implement further spending reductions, or will he push for more efficiency across government? Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is under pressure to use his speech to calm investors. And with South Africans going to the polls this year, Godongwana must also restore trust in government's ability to deliver services to all South Africans. The SABC News will bring you live coverage of the budget on the 21st of February 2024. SABC News in
Right, thank you very much. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana announced the introduction of Public Procurement Bill, and this will actually help many small businesses who wants to access opportunities in government. But of course, there's still a lot of going to be public consultation around this bill. A lot can change in terms of the form and some of the visions that this bill espoused to achieve. For more, we're now joined by the Black Business Council CEO, Hanki Matabani. And just your reaction in terms of this speech. Are you welcoming the public procurement bill?
Thank you very much, Tsepo and the viewers. Thank you very much for having us. We welcome certain components of the speech. Firstly, we welcome the public procurement bill. It has gone through the National Assembly, and now it's left with one leg, which is the National Council of Provinces. And then from there, it goes to the president to sign. And we welcome it. If it goes in the current form, we think it will bring a lot of change and difference in small businesses, black businesses, women-owned businesses, because it's got a component that is called set-asides. So government and state-owned enterprises will be able to set aside a certain amount of procurement for small business, for people living with disabilities, for young people, for people who were marginalized in the past. So we hope the president will sign it before the end of the parliamentary process now, because if it doesn't get signed, then it means it's going to go into the next part. We also welcome the support for black farmers. It's important that we level the playing fields created by apartheid. We support initial funding for national health insurance, but we will need more details as to the sustainability of the funding going forward. But in our view also, the budget lacks plans on industrialization, localization, so that we can create jobs here in South Africa. It also lacks plan on supporting small business, funding black business, funding youth-owned businesses. Because if you start with a problem statement to say our problem is the lack of growth of the economy, our second problem is the unemployment that we have. State SA just released the numbers yesterday. We are there, up there with the West as far as unemployment is concerned. So we're supposed to then say, if we want to create so many jobs, we want to reduce unemployment by so much in the next 5 years, in the next 30 years, because now we're celebrating the 30 years of democracy. We're supposed to then say, how do we do that? And our view is that we can only do that by funding small business, because they've got the capability to employ more people. Those people will pay tax, the small business themselves will pay tax, and that will create consumption in the economy, and that will then grow the economy.
Thank you very much. That's Hanki Matabani. He's the CEO of Black Business Council. I now hand you over to Bulelani, my colleague.
Thank you so much. Of course, we are doing more political relations here in the precinct of the Cape Town City Hall. Joining me now is Mansour Sheikh Imam from the NFP. You've always been talking about the issue of the social security net. Did the minister really go far enough?
Not at all. I must be honest, not impressive at all. You know, minister talks about appropriating a lot more funding for the police sector or the safety and security cluster, but not addressing the root causes of the high levels of crime. If you don't deal with the socio-economic conditions, then you're going to recruit more and more police officers. You're going to go and buy, and like he says, some of the funds that's coming from the asset forfeiture unit is going to be used to buying more vehicles and things. This is what is going to happen all the time unless you deal with the root causes of the high levels of crime, the high levels of unemployment, the socio-economic condition under which people are living, the availability of alcohol and drugs in the townships, taverns being open 24 hours a day. These are some of the things. Teenage pregnancy, 91,000 children giving birth to children, you know. So these are some of the things that he should be touching on, but he's not touching on it. And I don't know why we believe, and I believe it's not sustainable to continuously talk about rolling out more and more social grants rather than making people productive, giving them the dignity back, you know, so that they can earn a living and get back their dignity. But it's not happening. You know, the minister talks about infrastructure, 948 or so billion rand he wants to set aside. But he knows very well we don't have the capacity to be able to implement this. And more importantly, he knows and understands, and the former CEO of supply chain raised this before he left. 40% on goods and services is lost in this country because you don't get value for money. Now, can you imagine you setting aside 900 and some odd billion rand and 40% of that is going because you're not getting value for money? Now, the new Appropriation Bill will go a long way in dealing with it. But have we put sufficient measures in place to stop it? Certainly not. Minister is admitting that we're not even, you know, paying market-related prices for the goods you're buying for the state, and it should have been cheaper because we're buying in bulk. It's not the case because people, this is a milking cow and they're milking the state. Put measures in place to try and close those gaps. And I can tell you what is frightening for me is now we're even going to touch on those gold reserves. You know, 150 billion rand he might be taking away from them. He doesn't talk about, you know, stopping the borrowing of money. He wants to reduce it, but still borrow 20 cents on every rand being paid to our debt service cost. Where are we heading?
All right, thank you so much, Mansour Sheikh Imam from the NFP. For more reaction now, I cross back to my colleague Tsepo.
Thank you very much. I must say that the budget speech came as a surprise for many economists. They were expecting numbers that were worse than what came out during the medium-term budget policy statement. But for some reasons, there was a lot of improvement on various fronts. The budget deficit is still maintained below 5%. And of course, they've also trying to make sure that they contained expenditure. Revenue also, compared to the medium-term budget policy statement, not a massive increase. So there are some few surprises that economists are actually trying to look into with regard to this budget speech. I'm now joined by Nedbank's economist, Isaac Matiego, just to take us through some of these surprises that you've seen in the budget review.
Well, I'll say it was a good balancing act, a lot of pleasant surprises, the commitment to keep expenditure growth under control, and of course the faster than initially expected increase in tax revenue will help to reduce the budget fall to below 4% by 2026-2027.
What surprised me is the cost containment measures. They say that they are going to reverse some of those cost-cutting measures that were announced in the medium-term budget policy statement.
Yeah, a big focus on the public sector wage bill, but of course, you know, additional allocations for essential services. We're talking in the health sector, the security services, and also education. But other personnel costs will be controlled very strictly. And I believe it's the right thing to do, saying that, you know, where we're coming from, before COVID there were very high increases, and it's about time to contain that expenditure burden.
Is this approach sustainable, given that they had to use the foreign contingency reserves in order to reduce our debt to GDP?
Well, we're going to have to implement the hard measures to ensure that the increase of the debt stock is kept under control. Over the next 3 years, we're tapping about 150 billion out of the contingency reserve account. We have benefited from the increase, for instance, in the gold price, and also the weakness of the rand. That is filling a very important gap, but in the long term, we really have to do the serious things, implement serious measures to ensure that we expand the economy in that way, expand the tax base, and keep the debt stock under control.
If you look at various categories of taxes, also it gives an overall picture that things are still looking very bad, you know, and there are still a lot of challenges in terms of improving the tax collection.
Sure, but what's encouraging is the faster increase in personal taxes. I mean, we've seen, for instance, the financial services sector paying a bit more, but the bloodbath in the mining sector and the manufacturing sector, I must add, is really concerning.
That's Nedbank's Isaac Matiego about some of his reaction to the 2024 budget. I'll now hand you over to Bulelani Philip, my colleague.
Thanks again, Tsepo. Of course, the minister had a lot of tough juggling acts to do in relation to the allocations. Joining me now is Dr. Joe Phaahla, the Minister of Health. Dr. Joe Phaahla, thank you so much for your time. The allocations for health, will they ensure that hospitals and clinics have supplies? We have enough nurses, junior doctors are paid or employed?
Well, we are very grateful for the efforts the Minister has made to help us in the health sector. As the Minister has indicated, there will be growth in terms of the overall budget over the next 3 financial years. Just in terms of the specific areas which he has highlighted, in the area of assisting us to pay salaries, as we know that the reason why we have a number of junior doctors who have not been able to be given posts. There's a 11.6 billion rand over the next 3 years, starting in the 2024 financial year from 1st of April, an amount of 3.7 billion rand, which will be allocated in addition to what was already allocated. That will help us not only address the issue of doctors, but in terms of also making sure that other staff like nurses, pharmacists, physiotherapists, and the whole comprehensive team, we can be able to add more. So that takes us somewhere. You also mentioned 27 billion over the 3 years on infrastructure. That also takes us a long way. Also in the area of health information systems, digital health systems. So all those areas do help us to improve the quality of our health services. Of course, health is always a huge demand. So we can never say it's enough, because this is closing the gap on many years of a chronic underfunding. But we are very grateful that we are not going in reverse, we are going some steps forward.
Now, the National Health Insurance Scheme, which is probably a controversial scheme from other quarters, do you think the government will be able to afford it? Let's put aside the issues of the constitutionality of how it was adopted. Do you think the government can be able to afford it?
Well, we've always been saying that this is a question of reforming. As South Africa, as a country, we're already far above many countries in terms of spending. In terms of as a percentage of GDP, we have said we are at about 8.5% of GDP spending. It's just that it's fragmented. So I hear a number of media, some analysts talking about a 20% increase in tax. I don't know where they get that, because what we're talking about, it's a reform of how those of us who have income are already spending over and above what we spend in terms of taxes to the SARS. We pay taxes also in terms of we've got a parliamentary medical scheme.
So in short, you dispute that it will lead to higher increases in tax?
All that it will actually reduce for the spending of those who have income, who are already spending a lot more beyond just what we pay in general taxes. The specific contribution towards a national health insurance fund will be far lower than what those who have income are already spending. So that's what we can assure, especially those who have income, and therefore and we can look at South Africa is not we are not an island. These are practices which are already happening, in many countries all over the world, where over and above your general tax, there is a specific contribution which you make towards a protected fund, which looks after your health services.
Thank you so much, Minister. Dr. Joe Phaahla is the Minister of Health, and for more reaction, we cross back to Tsepo.
Thank you very much, Bulelani. For more reaction, we are now joined by the chair of Shell Downstream, Arwani Musaisi. Just to get a sense of the petroleum and energy industry, what is your reaction, overall impression from the minister's speech?
No, thank you, Sabo, for having me. Overall impression is that the speech was very balanced. The minister had to make very tough choices across the board, but I think I would say it's very neutral in terms of the petroleum side of the industry. And I say it's neutral, given that there's no new initiatives around, for instance, recovery mechanism for clean fuels or infrastructure investment around gas moving forward, and given the importance of gas in the energy transition.
I mean, we are told that as a country, for example, we may run out of LP gas, for example, following the decision by SASO. So I would assume there's a lot of focus on that in terms of the plan to come up with new gas.
Obviously, you're right. There's a discussion on the so-called gas cliff that comes in 2027, and definitely it is important. Gas plays an important role and can continue to play an important role, especially when you start to look at renewables and the future, given that gas emit 30% less than coal today, and therefore you can be able to build on gas as a resource for the future. And most important, on the other side, we do need to have newer reforms that can crowd in new investment into exploration of gas in our shores.
Thank you very much. That's Arwani Musaisi. He's the chair of Shell Downstream. And now hand you over to Bulelani Phillips.
night.
Thank you so much.
Tsepo.
Again, the moment, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana now joining me to talk more about his budget speech. Minister, thank you so much for making time. I know you have to go back into the House shortly. Firstly, coming into this budget and also post-budget, the opposition parties are criticizing you to say that this is the same old, but we'll see very little deliverables on the ground. Your reaction to that?
Of course, I wouldn't expect opposition to say, oh, this is a good budget, particularly in the context when we are going to an election. So there's nothing I can say to simply statements like that, unless they were pointing out a particular aspect of the budget.
And also there's criticism again for the National Treasury to tap into the reserves, saying that that's a dangerous game. How did you come to that decision?
No, where they are making a mistake is in ignorance of the fact that that account, when it is negative, National Treasury puts money into it. In 2003, it was negative. We had to put money into it. So when it is positive, National Treasury can access the positive part of it. It's in the Act.
And this budget, would you say that it will bring a better life for Dinswalo as espoused by President Cyril Ramaphosa?
Surely, what it does, if you look at the areas of focus, is in education, health services, and so on, and the employment of doctors, teachers, and so on. So, and also to advance the education system, we're putting a lot of money on the education side.
Social services, people are saying that at least the social grants should have been increased closer to the poverty line. Couldn't you have maneuvered towards that?
Look, there's a difference between your wish and your ability to do that. People who are saying it should have been approached, they must ask the question, are they prepared to pay more taxes? For me to raise this thing, if people are prepared to pay more taxes, I can raise it to whatever level.
But the question or the debate is that there's leakages in government which could be used to actually fund these social services.
It's all very well for somebody to say there are leakages. Everybody makes that bold statement. It would be useful somebody to say there's a leakage of X amount from which department, so that I should be able to respond, not to generalization. I'm quite interested to know where the leakages are. I would like to close them.
Take us through the tax increases. How did you arrive at that?
The tax increases is just, I didn't give anybody any tax relief this year, whether it's on credit card, on medical aids or anything else. We didn't do that. We also raised a number of sin taxes to increase that. And we also raise a bit of company tax for those companies that have offshore outfits that are paying lesser tax than South Africa. We're compensating for that.
The debt service costs, I mean, it's quite a big issue in the government budget. When are we going to reach the curve when it starts going down?
You will see, we're saying in 2026, 25, 26, we're reaching the peak. After that, it begins to go down. But there's no government in the world that does not have debt, because always the government has got a deficit when they present a deficit. But the key question is it a manageable level? And
just lastly, I've just spoken to the health minister here. The National Health Insurance Scheme is billed as one of the major, achievements of this democratic government. As National Treasury, have you been able to project how much it's going to cost and its impact in terms of the taxes?
We've not done that because it's not been assented yet by the president. As soon as the president does that, we'll then sit down with the Department of Health and say, how do we progressively realize the objectives of this? It's not going to be all of a sudden implemented tomorrow.
All right, thank you so much, Minister Enoch Godongwana, the Finance Minister. All the best in the implementation of the national budget. Of course, he's just delivered the budget speech for this year. And just a reminder to our viewers at home is that just inside here, the House, the National Assembly is considering a recommendation for the removal of 2 judges for gross misconduct. That is suspended Western Cape High Court Judge President John Klope, as well as retired Judge Ngola Mutata. So the parties will be voting in favor or against the removal of those 2 judges. We'll wait in anticipation to see the outcome later on in the afternoon.
budget speech, bringing you all the government's plans for the economy and what they mean for you. How will government fiscal consolidation affect you and your money? Can the minister implement further spending reductions, or will he push for more efficiency across government? Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is under pressure to use his speech to calm investors. And with South Africans going to the polls this year, Godongwana must also restore trust in government's ability to deliver services to all South Africans. The SABC News will bring you live coverage of the budget on the 21st of February 2024. SABC News, independent, impartial.